Hi, everybody. Your godmother is here. And welcome, welcome, welcome. Not only welcome tonight, but welcome to Women in Horror Month, which is my favorite month. So exciting. Um, those of you who have not been celebrating, get your acts together and start celebrating. We have a really exciting event tonight, and I'm going to be honest with you, I have not been able to sleep a wink for weeks because I have some of the lovely ladies of horror with us here. And you're asking yourself, Godmother, how did this happen? How did you get these amazing writers to come on and share their art and share their creativity with you? Well, let me explain how this all happens. Some of you are aware, like some of you got here because you were on my social media. You were following me on one of those random things out there, and you know that I am part of the Ladies of Horror Picture Prompt Challenge, which is a monthly challenge in which the lovely, wonderful, incomparable, did I mention I love her dearly, Nina D'Arcangelo. There aren't enough nice words in the world to describe Nina. She is the bee's knees. She is the cat's pajamas. She's everything. She sends out photographs, and we are asked to write a flash fiction piece in a very short amount of time, a quick turnaround, and send it back. And I'm one of the writers for Ladies of Horror, and I am also the voice actress. So again, some of you have been following this. If you have not, why not? Why are you not listening and reading along to this? They're short little tiny pieces that you could be reading as you wait for the bus, as you're on the treadmill, as you're on the toilet. They're so short. Just go through them every month. It's really interesting to see how the different writers address the different photos. Anyway, too late to make this long story short, but I always get really excited for Women in Horror Month. So I went into that group, which there is a private chat amongst women who maybe in the past were part of this group, are currently part of this group, are thinking about being part of this group. And I put out a call for writers to share new works that they have. So that's what makes this even more exciting. That's what ramps this up to a whole other level, is that they are going to be reading things that are like newish, and you might have never heard from this before. And I've never heard any of these readings before, and that's why I have been so excited and not sleeping at all. Also, I'm very old, and once you get old, you just don't sleep anymore anyway. But audience, please feel free to post your questions and comments in the chat. The authors will not be able to read them while they're reading, obviously, or respond at that moment, but they can certainly go back and look at them, and words of encouragement are always welcome. Like if you hear, they're reading and something, you just catch fire at something, make a comment about it. Also, we will have time at the end for Q&A, and I would love to see your questions coming in. We will have time to answer them, so ask away. Finally, while our authors are reading, I'm going to be putting links in the chat about what they're reading, and the book cover and the Amazon link. So to celebrate Women in Horror Month, consider purchasing one or all of these books that we're reading from tonight. And maybe at the end, we'll even mention a few more. Hint, hint, your godmother has something locked and loaded and ready to come out. Also, to celebrate Women in Horror Month, please watch horror movies by women horror directors. And if you need some suggestions, just ask your godmother. I have loads of them. So I'm going to introduce our first reader and get us going, because I'm super excited to start. R.A. Clarke is an author-illustrator living in Portage la Prairie, Manitoba. When she's not writing, she's enjoying family time, acting in community theater, or relaxing at the lake. Her multi-genre fiction has won international competitions such as the Write Fighters 3-Day Novella Challenge, the Writers Workouts Writers Games, the Writers Weekly 24-Hour Contest, and Red Penguin Books Humor Contest. She was a Futurescapes Award finalist in 2021, a Dark Sire Awards finalist in 2022, and her children's book, The Big Old Bike, was a Hindi's Libraries finalist in 2021. Her debut sci-fi novel, Race to Novus, was released in 2024 by Cloaked Press. Now, unfortunately, Rachel had something come up where she could not join us tonight. She's not ghosting us. It was a very real, very serious thing, and also an exciting thing, so we'll keep our fingers crossed for her. But she did give us a video. So I am going to play the video, and I'll put some information in the chat for you. It's going to take me just 1 second to pull this up because StreamYard can sometimes be like it is right now. Okay, so I am going to...
Hello. It's Rachel Clarke here, also known as R.A. Clarke in the adult fiction writing circles. Yes, thank you, Elaine, for having me here and for letting me read this story. I'm so excited to do this. It's a wonderful opportunity, and I can't wait to listen to the other stories. It's just I'm really, really happy to be here. So thank you for that. And today I am going to be reading from my book, Don't Look, Just Run, by R.A. Clarke. So this is a collection of horror stories, short stories, flash fiction, and poetry that I wrote, and it actually just came out in October of 2024. So it's a fairly new release book for me, and I'm really happy with it. I think it's great, and hopefully, if you're a horror fan, check it out. Maybe you'll like it too. So I'm going to read the first story from this book called The Finisher. And it's actually a story I wrote for a contest quite a while ago, years ago, and I expanded it, and it's just become, I don't know, one of my favorite stories, actually. So yeah, I will read some of it, and I hope that you will enjoy it. So here we go. From the moment I met Terry, I knew it was fate. She was looking to hire a very particular kind of somebody and stumbled across my Craigslist ad, which read, The Finisher, a step above the rest, proof on film every time. Completion, discretion, and creativity guaranteed. She had sent me a message, and though I wasn't sure if I'd accept the job, I agreed to meet her here. Not exactly the nicest part of town, but it made sense, considering. I smiled, shook her hand. I'm Winston. Nice to meet you. Hello, yes, I'm Terry. Same to you, too. She seemed nervous, her eyes darting around and hands quaking. But after a few moments, her posture relaxed a little. Probably realized the shabby pub was practically empty, nobody to overhear our conversation. What a beautiful creature. I ordered 2 bourbons, sliding one across the table to further ease her worry. I wanted to assure her I wasn't some generic thug, but rather an educated and well-mannered man who possessed a unique set of skills for which others paid handsomely. A professional. Terry sipped her drink and proceeded to explain why she'd called. She wanted somebody to scare her cousin, Damien. They lived next door to each other, stuck in a horrible feud that was getting out of control. Terry had apparently cared for Damien's ailing mother, a woman he sorely neglected. Years later, when the mother finally died, she'd left Damien's share of the inheritance to Terry instead of her own son. He began tormenting her, poisoning her flowers, leaving hateful notes on her car, shooting paintballs at her cat. He even accused me of stealing, she said, cheeks flushed. I suspected his accusation wasn't entirely untrue. Clearly the pretty thing had stolen his mother's heart. It wasn't a shock to me. Of course, the old lady would love Terry, but not only was she lovely, but this Damien guy sounded like a real asshat. Anyway, I got really fed up and fought back, she explained, staring at her hands. I'm not proud of it, but I spray painted Damien's precious sports car, poured bleach onto his lawn, tossed cat poop in his yard. Good for her. I didn't know what else to do. None of it worked. He didn't back off. She flung her hands out, then reeled them back in with a nervous glance at the bearded bartender. Don't worry about old Bob. He's heard a lot worse things than that in this bar, I said with a reassuring smile. I glanced back, waving a hand at her. Please, continue. Terry took a deep breath. Damien slandered my name all over our neighborhood, calling me a scheming gold digger, who had manipulated his mother, said I was toxic. He turned most of my extended family against me, made me into a black sheep. Terry explained she went to the police, and I shook my head. Calling the police never solves these kinds of issues. The way her voice shook, I could tell she was torn up inside. Poor thing. I just needed someone to make him believe bad things will happen if he keeps harassing me, she said with a weak smile. I think that will make him stop. I was unsure about the job. Honestly, it seemed a bit beneath me. Sure, it would be easy money, and cultivating fear was definitely in my wheelhouse, but my true specialty was death and disappearance. Money wasn't everything, after all. This kind of gig offered little opportunity to indulge in the creative expression I enjoyed. I nearly said no, but then Terry looked up at me with her big, innocent eyes. The delicate curve of her lips buckled my resolve, swaying me, seducing me. A woman like this needed a white knight, a protector. Knowing I could be that for her, I obliged. Honestly, I couldn't imagine many men denying her anything. She was a captivating woman. We shook hands and exchanged the necessary details. I required payment up front, and Terry slid an envelope across the table. She'd come prepared. I was impressed. Tucking the manila into my breast pocket, I nodded, happy to be doing business with you. I'll be in touch. Then we parted ways. A week later, the job was done. I was positive Damien wouldn't bother Terry anymore. I was also certain I was smitten, my thoughts consumed by Terry's long brown hair and curvy figure. Like a hunter spying a doe in the meadow, her vulnerability drew me in. A woman of Terry's caliber deserved the very best in life, and I knew I could give that to her. She'd come into my world for a reason. I couldn't wait to see her again. Terry insisted we meet in public, so we returned to the same pub, tucking into a corner booth. I proudly showed Terry her film. See, most of the clientele enjoy seeing visceral proof of that their job has been completed. Doing so is part of my business model, a little something extra to set me apart from my competitors. I grinned at the end of the video when the camera panned over my hand-painted portrait of Damien's face. The words, "Keep your mouth shut and leave Terry alone," written around in thick red letters. I'd pinned Damien's bloody tongue to the colorful canvas for authenticity. Just another example of my artistic flair that my clients could expect. A calling card of sorts. Perhaps a touch flamboyant, garnering unwanted scrutiny from the law, but I didn't care. With my IQ and alter ego, they'd never catch up to me. I like to think of myself as the Bruce Wayne of killers. I was the finisher for a reason. Given Terry's penchant for spray painting cars, I was certain she'd appreciate my creative gesture, her very own custom piece of art. But Terry didn't look impressed. She seemed more worried for Damien than anything else, asking if he'd be all right. Of course, he's not dead, I replied. I had made sure not to kill him. It was excruciating not to, but I'd reined myself in. For her. Yet she kept shaking her head, using words like permanent damage and excessive force. What? Perhaps I misspoke? Clearly she needed enlightening. I explained that I had broken Damien's hands, clipped his tongue, and popped his eyes out of their sockets for a reason. It's perfect symbolism, you see. These body parts were the tools he used to spread evil and make your life miserable. It's fitting. What I just did definitely put the fear into him and sent a clear message, just like you asked. I smiled, but it was disheartening when she didn't seem to appreciate my unique artistry. Her brows kept pinching together, and I didn't like that. Stretching my neck side to side, I felt the satisfying crack in my joints, then took a deep breath. I wasn't used to receiving that kind of reaction, not in the circles I traveled. My work was typically admired, highly regarded. My fingers fiddled with the smooth handle buried in my pocket. What if somebody finds out I hired you? Did you leave any evidence behind? The words rushed from Terry's mouth, her eyes wild as her hands raked through her hair. Leave evidence behind? Does she think I'm some kind of amateur? Holding on to my tenuous sense of calm, I tried to put myself in her shoes. Her problems had been solved, so she was probably just overwhelmed by the freedom she'd regained. It was a perfectly executed job, I assure you. No police will knock on your door. Then Terry's face turned red. avoiding my eyes as she grabbed her jacket and purse. My teeth clenched. My fingers tightened around the grip on the Swiss Army knife tucked inside my pocket. I just did this woman a huge favor, and she thinks she can be angry? That she can leave? I'm sorry, you must be confused. I whipped my hand out and slammed the pointed tip of the blade into the table. The thick wooden slab shook. She flinched, her face growing pale. I immediately apologized for my outburst. Stupid, stupid, stupid. Anger probably wasn't the most attractive quality to present to a love interest. Okay, yes, it's perfectly fine. I'm sorry I upset you. Terry spoke quickly, encouraging me to stay calm and relax. There. See? I didn't think she was actually angry, just a miscommunication. Her voice was back to being soft and soothing, highlighting her peaceful spirit. Exactly the kind of woman I needed in my life, someone to keep me grounded. On a whim, I reached across the table to hold her hand and asked her out on a date, starting now. She slapped my arm and tried to pull away. So playful. But I squeezed tight, grinning like a schoolboy in love. Terry smiled sweetly, glancing at her watch. Goodness, I'm going to be late. I have to go, Winston. Perhaps another time? She thanked me for all my help, even complimented my painting skills before explaining she had urgent business to take care of. Her gentle hand tugged, pulling from mine much sooner than I would have liked, but I let it go. Terry stood. I'll call you, she said over her shoulder as she rushed out the door. But she didn't. Terry was a tough woman to get a hold of after that. All my emails bounced back and her phone number was disconnected. That silly girl seriously needed to pay her bills on time. A police cruiser sat outside her house every day. At first, I thought it was her cousin's protection detail, but that concept really didn't make much sense. Damien was still in the hospital. I needed to see her again, so I decided to pay a special visit. As a general rule, I avoided follow-ups with clientele, but an exception could be made if it meant securing the woman of my dreams. Arriving on her block, I saw the police car was still there. Inconvenienced, I set to work. 30 minutes later, the ground reverberated as a garage 2 blocks over exploded into flame. As predicted, the cruiser took off. Nothing beats the reliability of a strategically placed incendiary device. I wouldn't have much time until the street flooded with red and blues, so I worked quickly. After picking the back door lock and sliding inside the house, I swept the main floor. Nothing. Paused, stroking my jaw and wondering where she might be. A creak upstairs caught my attention. I ascended the stairs quietly, hearing a click down the hall. Was Terry being playful again, hiding to surprise me? Tiptoeing across the floorboards, a faint noise emanated from the bedroom closet. Aha! Whipping the door open, I smiled. There she was. Huddled in the corner, her eyes were adorably wide as she peered up at me. She looked stunning. The muffled voice of a dispatcher echoed from the cell phone pressed against Terry's chest, telling her to remain calm. Of course, she dialed 911. Wouldn't anyone after a sudden explosion? I grabbed the phone from her hands and turned it off. Well, I smashed it under my boot to be exact, but that's a minor detail. Cell phones were overrated anyway. People wasted their lives playing on those things. Regardless, a vital question needed to be answered. Why were police parked outside? I pulled her out of the closet. Did you call them? Were you worried Damien would try and retaliate somehow? Yes, I was. So much. She immediately agreed, her head fervently bobbing up and down. Ah, I thought so. For a moment there, I seemed like she called the police because of me. A ridiculous thought. My Terry would never do something like that. To distract her from her worries, I whisked her out of the house and we shared the rest of the day together. Our real first date. Our first real date. It was important to nurture this growing spark. And that's that.
So we started off really strong with our first reading for tonight. Let me introduce our next author, and I've already put a little tease up there. You can see a really cool cover. Mercedes M. Yardley is a whimsical dark fantasist. She is the author of numerous works, including Love is a Crematorium and Other Tales, Darling, the Stabby award-winning apocalyptic Montessa and Nuclear Lulu, A Tale of Atomic Love, Pretty Little Dead Girls, Detritus in Love, and Nameless. She won the Bram Stoker Award for her stories Little Dead Red and Fracture. Mercedes lives and works in Las Vegas. And we have some exciting news. Mercedes' latest collection, Love is a Crematorium, has been nominated for a Stoker Award. So congratulations, Mercedes. That nod is well deserved. And Mercedes is one of our 2 birthday girls that we have here. We got all kinds of Pisces reading for us tonight. She is one of our 2 birthday girls. So I'm going to invite her onto the stage. And while she's reading, I'll put some information in the chat for you. So Mercedes, please take it away whenever you're ready.
Hi, I'm Mercedes. I am so happy to be here. And I'm reading from Love is a Crematorium and Other Tales. The story that I'm reading from is my very first story in here, and it's titled Loving You Darkly, and has this little picture that comes with it. All right. Loving You Darkly. Silva's lover was built of bones she scavenged from the killing fields. A shard of gleaming femur here, a handful of vertebrae there. She held him together with wire and glue and the most charming of ribbons. When she put his jawbone into place, he opened and shut it a few times to make sure it was working correctly. It fit nicely, and he grinned as skeletons are wont to do. His hollow sockets glowed with something deeper than dark magic. They glowed with love. Thank you, he said, and the clicking of his teeth reminded Silva of wooden puppets dancing toward a stage with a fine red curtain. I felt ever so much better. You're welcome, she said, and her voice nearly sounded like bones themselves. I was afraid perhaps you wouldn't want to be collected. Maybe you were happier at rest where you were. He shook his head. There was no rest, only staring at the sky and being eaten by worms. Memories of 1,000 lives lived by those who left me, men and women, but now it's mostly me. He held out his hand, and Silva took it. I do enjoy being simply me. He made himself a home in the hidden burrow where Silva lived. It was deep and dark and sheltered, and his dead eyes saw perfectly in the blackness. When Silva came back the next morning, the skeleton showed her a new dress he was making from scraps and fur. Is that for me? Silva asked, her eyes shining. It wouldn't do me much good now, would it? He asked, glancing down at his mismatched ribs and pelvis. But a living girl? Ah, loved one. You need something to cover your sack of skin. You look so cold when you return. I would keep you warm in other ways, if only I could. Silva smiled, but her lips quivered, and she dashed at her cheeks with the backs of her hands. The skeleton nearly remembered the purpose of water leaking from the eyes, but it was soon lost with the rest of his memories. He moved on instinct alone, taking a thin bone from his foot and sharpening it into a needle. He took sinew and made a staunch thread, and then he sewed, his needle darting as songs of the old ways fell from his mouth. Which part of you knows those songs? Silva asked. And the skeleton cocked his head, thinking. I think it is my left scapula, he answered. It remembers songs and stories and a bit about playing music. The fellow who left these bones, he was a lucky man indeed. He loved to dance. Do you love to dance, small one? Silva smiled. I did dance once, before the breeders came. We lived in a home with a great hall, and my father would invite people to the finest balls, and I would dance and dance until I was sent to bed, and then I would sneak out into the staircase in my nightgown and watch the lords and the ladies. It was a wonderful thing. Why don't you dance now? The skeleton asked, and Silva looked away sharply. Dance here, in the burrow? It has been an animal's burrow, and I carved it bigger day by day until a human could fit. There's barely enough room to sit, let alone dance. How silly. He watched her with his missing eyes. He would wait. He could listen. She drew her hands through the packed earth of the burrow. There was a time when I would get anything to dance. The sound of a flute silvered through my soul in a way that I can't even describe to you. I dreamed in pirouettes. It sounds lovely, he said. I can imagine you twirling your way to breakfast in the morning." Her lips fluttered into a smile and quickly disappeared. "There was room then, and joy. This place is so small. It's nothing but roots and refuse." She kicked, and an angry shower of earth fell upon her. He wanted to ask her why she didn't dance when she was outside under the moon. She only scavenged at night and in the mornings, until when the breeders slept. Why didn't she dance then in her too short, tattered gray dress? "It was white once," she mentioned when he asked. "Beautiful and white, and it fit me perfectly. I was to meet the man I should marry, and I wore my best dress." "And then what happened?" Silva's eyes were lovely. "I was in this dress, and my father was beside me. We were walking to the carriage. My shoes were made of linen and silver, and my father wore such a wonderful jacket. He had met my husband to be and approved. I was afraid, but he told me I'd soon fall in love with his kindness and his humor. He told me it would be okay." A frown pulled at her mouth. "But it wasn't okay. Never again." Part of the skeleton's radius, which had belonged to a gentle, wise woman, told him to put his bony arm around Silva. He did so. "There are different levels of okay," he said simply. "And now you are okay. You're even comfortable. You have a companion who loves you, and you have somebody to love. You are safe while you share your story." Silva stilled her trembling mouth. The ground shook. There was a sound like thunder, noise that I couldn't comprehend. The breeders played horns and bugles that confused us. They rode tall beasts that made horses seem stunted by comparison. They set fire to everything they could find. My father, her father, had gone up like a wick, his hair flaming and his legs high-stepping in his fiery coat. His skin popped and ran, and he looked like a clown doing a foxtrot before he fell. She stared at him, watching his fine shoes char as he kicked and bucked. She remembered dancing with her handsome daddy as a little girl, standing on his shoes and holding his hands as they box-stepped and cha-cha'd. He whirled her around, making her laugh, and she realized that he was laughing too, deep and free and utterly happy. "I hope you always dance, little bird," he had told her. And she had. Oh, she had. She would dance forever if it would make him laugh like that. But now those fine shoes were burning, singeing away to reveal his vulnerable skin, the flesh curling to reveal the white bones underneath. Silva stared at him in horror, unable to move, only able to scream along with the hunting horns. Around her, the men were chopped down like trees. Children were trampled, women stolen and tied to beasts. I was able to unhook one of the horses from the carriage. I climbed on and rode until the animal was in the lather. Still, it wouldn't stop, its eyes rolling in its head like madness itself. And quite honestly, I don't know if I would have let it stop if it tried. We did escape that day, and after a few days' walk, I found this burrow. And the horse? He knew, seeing as not all his bones were human. A small fragment of something larger had been smoothed down to create one of his arms. I thanked the horse, but soon I ran out of food, and he was all I had. You hit him on the head with a rock, if my bones are recalling correctly. Yes, her voice was unflinching. And then I skinned him with another sharp rock. I ate him, and you're making me a dress with some of his skin. I used his hair to tie things together, and his bones to make tools. His jaw helped me dig out some of this burrow. Never have I loved a horse or been so grateful as I was to this one. The horse in the skeleton's soul was pleased, and told her as much. Her eyes shone when she answered. "Thank you," she said, "for everything." And that is from my book, Love is a Crematorium.
And that is going into my Amazon cart right now.
Thank you.
I loved Pretty Little Dead Girls. I love Little Dead Red. So I know I will love this one.
Thank you so much.
And I do have some questions for you later, but I'm going to kick you out now. I love kicking people out of the studio. That makes me really weirdly happy. So let's see. What do I have next? Ooh, we have Lee Mitchell next. Officer worker by day, science fiction and horror writer by night, Lee Mitchell reaches out through their stories to generate new approaches to old questions about the human condition. Their work reflects a dichotomy of darkness and hope, such as the world we live in, exploring good and evil through their love of the written word. Their worldview might seem a little different to most. Lee believes in magic and marvels and miracles, but no one can deny the wonder they leave in their wake. So I'm going to be filling in for Lee. She's not going to be reading, but she is here with us in the chat. So feel free to drop your questions in the chat. And before I start reading, so that I don't forget, I am going to put the Amazon link in. It's coming up right now for her book. I'm reading an excerpt from The Lasting Light by Lee Mitchell. The Lasting Light is the second book in the Divine Darkness trilogy. In the distance, just within view, a fire cut through the dark horizon. Is that the ranch? Aurora knelt close to a massive rooted cluster of tumbleweed. I'm going to go check it out. You two stay right here. I'll be back. Jacob shot into the air, sending sandy gusts in his wings' powerful wake. Aurora sprinted toward the burning ranch. Sam rushed in to stop her. He just told us to wait here. But what if someone you know needs help? Both our moms are in there. The boy went quiet for a few seconds, the concern etching itself deeper across his face with each passing moment. Fine, but we don't do anything dangerous, and you follow my lead. Fine. Aurora hurried off, staying low and moving between patches of foliage. Sam ran to catch up. The two stopped and knelt by another mound of tumbleweed a few yards outside the perimeter, and Aurora felt heavy pangs of panic in her chest when she saw the flames so close. All the houses were engulfed, and there were no signs of family, save the defending guardians. Winged fighters battled the invading beings overhead. Sparks lit the darkening sky like fireworks as swords and daggers clashed against maces and morning stars. Jacob and Kristen, the camp's vampiric, demon-eating night protectors, were in the air as well, tearing through the enemy's front line. Blood showered down before a demon man dropped to the ground only feet away from where Aurora and Sam huddled. Black blood gushed from the creature's neck. He was still alive, but he seemed unable to pull himself upright. He attempted to claw himself from the scene with desperate arms, dragging his legs behind him. Red, membranous wings thrashed wildly against the earth, kicking up plumes of sand and dirt, but the effort didn't afford the demon nearly enough lift, leaving him flailing along the ground. Kristen dive-bombed into the injured creature, which screamed at the sight of the blood-soaked predator. She snatched him into her arms before rushing back into the air with a thrust of her feathery black wings. Aurora scanned the surrounding area, searching for signs of life, while her mind struggled to process the chaos. "What's happening? How did they find us?" Sam cried. "Where's my mom?" "I don't know." Aurora struggled to breathe as the reality of the situation fully hit. "Where's mine?" Could they be in with the fires? Aurora fought to hold her composure. "I think I might need to shatter all this." The boy shook his head. "But what if you don't come back this time?" "Promise me you'll get help." "But you can't. They're all dead, Sam." "Wait until it's safe and then get me inside." Sam gave her a reluctant nod. "Just promise me you'll come back." A lump caught itself in Aurora's throat as she nodded back. She felt the air around her begin to buzz, and she stood fully upright despite the threat swooping down from above. She winced, her jaw going tight as a symphony of screeches tore through the air. Time halted for a heartbeat right before the fabric of space shattered, and the old reality came raining down in jagged, dissipating shards. Aurora watched the restored landscape take hold while her mind slipped off and her limbs went limp. She heard Sam call out for help, just as her consciousness slid off into the other place. She steadied her breath, fighting the panic that always came when she first sent herself to the confused void. It hosted every nightmare she'd ever erased, playing each in a loop composed of eternal specters that reflected that which might have been. Aurora had no choice but to walk through each of them, over and over, until her mind finally recovered from the strain of her latest effort. She watched as the fire once again consumed her mother and other loved ones as death and blood rained down from the battle above. The shaken child reminded herself that she was in good hands. Sam was her best friend, and he would see to it that she was okay until she woke. Until then, all she could do was be patient, stay as calm as possible, and continue to remind herself that, at least where it mattered, her family was safe. Alicia Brown stared at the tiled kitchen counter, unsure of what she was doing in the room. Shadows of an alternate memory, one filled with demons and pain and fire, faded into the back of her mind, and she moved to the refrigerator to see if something in there might spark some recall. What had she been doing? She turned, noting her friend Meg, Sam's mother, sitting at the table. "I'm so sorry, what was I saying?" Meg, a pretty blonde with snowy white angel wings, stared back for a moment before she replied, "We were talking about the enemy attacks, I think." "Yes, that's right." Alicia looked down. "There's gotta be more we can do to safeguard ourselves. What if we sent a convoy of our own, but on a mission of peace? Maybe we could find a way to show them that they're attacking us over a lie." "You can't reason with zealots, Meg. They're convinced we're all demons protecting the Antichrist. They don't even acknowledge that we're human beings anymore. How do you persuade someone to ignore their own eyes?" Meg shrugged. "Probably doesn't help our cause that we have vampires and werewolves protecting the property." "Probably not." "But if there is an Antichrist, they're probably the ones harboring it," Meg scoffed. "That they believe a virgin would give birth to the child of Satan is downright offensive." "They don't know I'm a virgin. They just know what they see." "Well, there's got to be some way of reasoning with them." Meg shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "I mean, we all learned to accept the truth. It was a tough pill to swallow, that no matter who you are, your enemy looks like a demon. But if we figured it out, there must be people on the other side who have too. If we could just find a way to reach them, maybe we could put all this senseless fighting to an end." "Help!" Sam's scream echoed from somewhere far off. Alicia and Meg both froze for a moment, the panic taking a moment to register. Then they both bolted for the door leading out. They paused at the sight of what appeared to be pieces of the sky falling to the ground and dissipating into little puffs of glitter. Alicia took to the air, cursing under her breath. Jacob flew ahead of her, seeming to know where he was going and needing no explanation for the glimmering shards of reality that continued to fall to the earth. "Do you remember what happened?" Alicia asked as soon as she caught up. "I think we were under attack." Jacob shook his head. "The whole place was on fire." A momentary recollection hit Alicia, and for an excruciating second, she could feel the zip ties binding her limbs, the acrid splash of gasoline dousing her body, and the searing flames eating her alive. "You okay?" Jacob asked. Alicia nodded, focusing on the current reality that, no doubt, Aurora had manifested. Her panic grew as she spotted Sam carrying the unconscious girl toward the gate. The 12-year-old boy handed Aurora over to Jacob, then doubled over to catch his breath. "She did it again," he huffed. And I'm going to stop there because that's all Lee gave me, which is completely unfair because I want to know what happened. So now I'm also going to have to buy this book. This is fun. I love how we're all like coming from different angles in the horror, fantasy, dark literature genre. I'm still so excited. Like I'm shaking with pleasure over all of this. We have one more reader. And then, as I said, we'll have some Q&A and a little bit of chat. And I appreciate everyone for being here. Those of you viewers from the future, people from the future, I'll be putting those Amazon links in the YouTube descriptions. You'll have those as well. Suzi Madron was born in New York City and has lived up and down the East Coast. Currently, she resides in a house built over a Civil War battlefield in the wilds of Pennsylvania, where she's been known to host some interesting Halloween parties. She has authored several novels and stories under various names, including Suzi M., James Glass, and Zircon. And Suzanne is our other birthday girl. Her birthday was Wednesday, so make sure that you give her a happy birthday in the chat, and I will put up her book and I will invite her to the stage. Suzi, feel free to start whenever you're ready.
Okay, thanks for having me, and hello out there in the future. I'll be reading from the 5th book in the Immortal War series. It's God in a House of Crosses, and I'm just going to start from the beginning, where we meet our main character, Lily. Lily was at her usual table in the coffee shop when the screech of tires pulled her from the pages of Wuthering Heights. She glanced up to see what the commotion was and noticed a black SUV pull up to the curb. Nothing good came from an unmarked car hanging around any place. Double bad when it had government license plates and no markings. With a sigh, she marked her page as men in suits as black as the SUV itself poured out from every door of the vehicle, then spread out like an oil slick on water. Here we go again, Lily muttered as she calmly slid the book into her messenger bag. She got to her feet and called out to the barista, "Hey, Kevin, if those guys outside come in here asking about customers, you haven't seen me here today. I'm going to try and sneak out the back, but I'm not sure I'll make it. Just roll with it, all right? I'll think of something." The kid nodded to let her know he had heard her, but his gaze was locked in panic on the men in black suits as they approached the entrance to the coffee shop. The paper cups he had been stacking shook in his hands, and he looked about ready to bolt himself. "Kev," she clapped her hands. "Kev!" He turned his face toward her, but his eyes remained in the windows. "They aren't here for you." "They're not? Then who are they here for? They're here for me, okay?" He nodded and placed the shaking cups on the counter. He didn't seem to believe her. Okay." The suits outside glanced up and down the street, nodding to one another and touching the communication devices in their ears. After a moment of talking, they moved as a collective cliche toward the door. Lily slipped through the stock area and small kitchen as she made her way to the back of the coffee shop to the emergency exit. She knew it wouldn't be hooked up to the alarm because the staff used it frequently to both take the trash out and to sneak out to smoke in the alley on the other side. When she reached the exit, she paused and pressed her ears against the cold metal door. She could hear men's voices on the other side. There were at least 3 of them, and they spoke to one another in low tones. She looked up at the ceiling for a possible escape and groaned at the open industrial design. A drop ceiling would have made an excellent hiding place. Glancing around for an alternate escape route, her eyes fell on the barista aprons hanging on the hook by the door. She grabbed one of the aprons and tucked her phone into the front pocket before tying the apron strings around her midsection. The name tag said her name was Beth, and she took it off in case people got nosy and started asking too many questions. She wasn't sure how well Kevin would be able to improvise should the need arise, but she needed to assess her situation without him stumbling over her name. No one looked too hard at anyone wearing a uniform. It was as if the uniform removed the humanity it clothed and turned the person into an object. The thought struck her with its implications, but she put it from her mind. Today, she would have hated this aspect of a uniform, but today she intended to use it to her advantage. From the front of the shop, she heard the jingle of the bell over the front door as the suits finally made their entrance. She knew Kevin would do his best not to betray her. She also knew the men weren't local law enforcement. She wasn't sure who they worked for, but it wasn't anyone she wanted to meet. Lily moved fast and pulled her hair back in a ponytail as she kicked her messenger bag next to Kevin's backpack on the floor, under the apron hook. She grabbed one of the many bags of trash Kevin had placed next to the door with the intention of putting them out as soon as the flow of customers subsided. "Hey, Kevin," she called loud enough for the suits in the shop to hear her and to interrupt them before they had a chance to start asking questions. "You want me to take out the trash before I go?" Kevin's voice shook, and he had to try twice to get it above a squeak. "Sure, thanks." There was a pause, and then she heard him say, "Hi, gentlemen, what can I get you today?" Without waiting for a reply from the suit, she pushed the emergency door open and used her butt to hold it as she dragged the bags into the alley, tossing them out with an annoyed grunt. She hid a smirk when she heard one of the suits in the alley curse as he was forced to jump out of the way when she almost hit him with a bag of trash. The men prepared themselves for her to make a run for it, and she blinked up at them in what she hoped was a bored barista sort of way. "Hey, sorry about that," she said in her most neutral tone as she gestured at the bags of trash. "Didn't realize anyone was out here. Excuse me, mister." She nudged her way to the garbage dumpsters and left the bags of trash next to them. The suits relaxed as she moved back toward the emergency door and took the other bags out to the awaiting dumpsters. She judged both the distance she would need to run to get to the street, should she need to do so, and how fit the men in suits looked. They looked very fit, and she estimated she would need to outrun all of them for about 50 yards. She wouldn't make it. Time for Plan B. Calmly, she re-entered the building, leaving the door slightly ajar so the men in the alley would be able to see her as she hung up the apron and grabbed up her messenger bag. She began to push back through it as she called over her shoulder. "Okay, Kev, bags are out, kitchen's clean, I'm off. See you tomorrow." "See ya, thanks for taking out the trash," came the reply from the front of the store. As she exited, one of the suits stopped her and her heart sank. He looked identical to every other suit, right down to the painfully short haircut and dark sunglasses, and Lily wondered if there was some sort of secret agent surplus store where these guys shopped, or if their employer bought in bulk. "Excuse me, miss, are there any other people in the coffee shop?" "Like, you mean customers or employees?" "Customers," the suit said with a patronizing smile. Lily shrugged. "There was one person a while ago, but I don't know if they left or just, went to the bathroom." "Can we ask you some questions?" asked another member of the Black Suit Brigade. He looked like he could have been a clone of the original speaker. She forced herself to look as annoyed as she felt. If it's quick, I guess. I need to get to my other job, and it's a hike." "It'll only take a second." Suit number one reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and held out a piece of photo paper at her. "Have you seen this woman?" Lily wondered if these guys had gotten training from hell. They were a walking cliché right down to the suits and homogenized looks. At least hell has an excuse, she thought. It had gleaned all of its topside knowledge of style and fashion from old Hollywood noir films, so all the demons looked vaguely like Humphrey Bogart's stunt doubles, right down to the hand-rolled cigarettes. She suspected the suits might be the next generation of Hell's minions, and someone had forgotten to send out a memo. Hell loved its paperwork, after all. She stared hard at her own face in the photo and wrinkled her brow as if concentrating. Inside, her stomach was lurching. She didn't know how they'd found her or how they'd gotten close enough to take her photo. Luckily, she wasn't wearing makeup in the picture, and her hair was its natural color. She looked up at suit one and shrugged. "She looks familiar. I think she used to come in here with her boyfriend, maybe. I think." "When was that?" "About 6 months ago." Suit number two smirked and raised an eyebrow at her from over his dark glasses. "You remember someone from 6 months ago?" "I remember her boyfriend, yeah." Lily grinned up at them. "He was a hottie. Are they in trouble or something?" Suit number one smiled reassuringly. "No, we just want to talk with her. Do you know what happened to them?" Lily shrugged and pretended not to notice the quick glances hidden behind the dark sunglasses of the men. "I guess they broke up, because I haven't seen either of them in a while." She shifted her messenger bag on her hip and checked the time on her phone. "We done here? I really gotta get going, right now, or I'm gonna be late." The suits looked at one another, then back to her and gave a collective nod. Suit number one gave a tight-lipped smile. "Thank you for your help, miss." "Sure, no problem." Lily forced herself to remain calm as she walked at a hurried pace down the alley. She hoped she looked like someone who was late for their second job rather than someone who was trying to get away. As soon as she reached the street, she put on a pair of sunglasses and felt immediate paranoia. It felt as if she was being watched from every angle. Every tourist with a camera made her self-conscious, and she tried her best to hide her face as she faded into the crowds on the sidewalk. At the front of the coffee shop, the men in suits were asking Kevin if he had ever seen the woman in the photograph, just as Lily was making her escape. He stared at the picture and his lower lip trembled. "Is she in trouble?" "That doesn't matter. Can you tell us if you know the woman in the picture?" Kevin shook his head. "I don't recognize her, no." "Take a closer look. Was she a regular a few months ago?" Kevin looked again at the photo, then stared up at his own terrified face reflected back at him in the lenses of the sunglasses. He shook his head. "I've never seen her before, I swear." "How long have you worked here?" Kevin shifted his gaze to the other suit, and a different set of his own twin reflections stared back at him. "A couple of years?" "And how long has the other barista worked here?" "Which one?" "The one who just left." His mind went blank, and he went on autopilot. "I'm the only one scheduled for this shift." Immediately, he realized his mistake and clamped his mouth shut, but it was too late. The head suit smiled down at him. "Thank you, Kevin. You've been a great help." "Hold up! They changed the schedule!" The suits smirked as they left the coffee shop, and Kevin called out after them. "Hey, I forgot they changed the schedule." He stared helplessly after them, too afraid to follow beyond the counter and too afraid to call Lily to warn her lest they had the shop's landline tapped. As the men in dark suits exited the coffee shop, they paused. When the other suits from the alley emerged, they converged and climbed back into their vehicles. The leader of the operation dialed a number and waited. Someone on the other end picked up on the second ring. "Report. We know where she is. Did you get her?" "Not yet. There were witnesses." The line crackled as the speaker on the other end paused. "What is your plan?" "We follow her, and when the time is right, we get her. Minimal cleanup. Proceed." Lily rounded the corner and turned in the opposite direction of the entryway to the coffee shop. Her head was a mess of chaotic thought, and she tried to focus. Her first concern was, how had they taken her picture without her noticing? At least it was an old photograph, but still, if she made it away unscathed from this encounter, she would need to be more cautious, she knew. As she walked, she quickened her pace. She expected to hear the sounds of running footsteps behind her at any moment, but none came. As a bus passed by her, she changed her appearance. In an instant, her shoulder-length raven black hair faded to a golden brown and curled into tight ringlets. Her pale skin became light tan and freckled, and her height increased by 3 inches. By the time she reached the corner of the main avenue, she looked like anyone else in the village crowd, right down to the ripped blue jeans and faded band t-shirt. She followed a winding path, cutting into alleyways and side streets as she went, always careful to look around her. When she reached two other buildings, nearly butted up against each other, she sidestepped through the bricked-over passage that would have connected to the backs of the buildings and into an even older, soot-stained alleyway. As soon as she was through, and sure no one had followed her, she breathed a sigh of relief. Even more unease fell from her as the lights of the Limbo Diner blinked at her from the haze, reflecting off the puddles of standing water pooling between the worn cobblestones of the walled-off alleyway. She splashed her way to the door, heedless of the wetness seeping into her sneakers. Conversation stopped abruptly as she pushed through the door, and she winced at the way the bell sounded more like windows breaking in the silence. She smiled apologetically and scanned the faces turned toward her as she made her way into the diner. Asriel looked up from a book he'd been reading and stared at her for a moment, before giving a solemn nod of recognition. Nazarene. Lily nodded at the angel, ever impressed at the way he seemed to keep up with the times, no matter the century or the changes in fashion. His white dress shirt and black slacks were a classic look, and somehow fit his alabaster pale skin and wavy black hair. Like the other angels and demons, his eyes were a silver chrome that was startling to the uninitiated. Unlike the other angels, however, his wings were raven black, when he chose to show them, where the other angels' wings were white as freshly fallen snow. "Are you well?" asked the angel of death. Lily gave him an unsteady smile. "For the moment, yes, thank you." She continued past Asriel toward the back of the diner. As she passed the counter, she glanced behind it. The diner's would-be waiter was sprawled on the floor, overdosed again. The needle hung from his arm at an angle that was painful to look at, and his belt-turned tourniquet lay on the floor next to him like a sleeping viper. Vomit ran from his open mouth and across the tiles behind the counter, and Lily grimaced. Luckily, she'd not come to the diner for the coffee. If she was honest, the only person who had worked the counter who could make a decent cup of coffee was Cherry, and she had moved on. Cott sat in the last booth of the diner. At the sight of her, he sat up straighter and adjusted his tie. His typical lewd grin was already spreading across his lips as he said, "Well, hello there, fresh meat. You're lost." Lily held up a hand to stop him before he went on any further, with his canned pickup line for wayward mortals. "It's me, Koth. Save the inappropriate flirting for someone who doesn't know you." The demon's brow furrowed, and he looked at her more closely as she slid into the seat across from him. As his silver eyes met hers, his face lit up with recognition, and he grinned. "You look different. Did you dye your hair or something?" Lily blinked at him, unsure if he was playing with her. From his expression, however, she saw that he was serious. "Yeah, something like that," she said, and decided to let it go. "I like it." He smiled at her and continued to contemplate her new appearance. "Thanks. So what brings you here?" he asked. "Don't you usually get your coffee over at that place on 6th? Lily nodded. "Yeah, I do. I just left there, in fact." She folded her hands on the table in front of her and noticed for the first time that they were shaking. He followed her gaze and became serious. "What's wrong?" "I'm in trouble, Koth." "I like trouble," the demon told her with a wide grin that displayed row upon row of jagged teeth. His real teeth. The teeth that hid behind the human facade. "What do you need from me?" And I'll leave it at that.
Ooh, good place to end. Wonderful. And that's another one that's going to end up in my cart. I'm bringing Mercedes back to the stage as well. So, Suzanne, quick question. You write under different nom de plumes. How do you know when to write under which? Like, do they do a different style of writing? Can you tell us what to look for with the different names?
So typically James Glass, I started writing the Metatron mysteries as James Glass because it was very hard-boiled noir, Dashiell Hammett sort of books, and it just sounded like somebody named James Glass would write them. And he's got like his own personality and everything, and Zircon's got his own personality. And in Apocrypha of the Apocalypse, there's actually a short story where James Glass and Zircon come to visit me, and we go out and have adventures. And they're kind of ridiculous. And they became kind of a prototype for the demons in the Metatron mysteries, Pazuzu and Marduk. So each story written by the different pseudonyms is a different style. Eventually, James Glass became me, and it all merged together, and all the universes kind of converge.
Oh, wow. That's so interesting. Mercedes, I have a question for you too that came up when I was reading. Like, I've always admired your fairy tale-esque magical, whimsical style. But then you have these moments like where the daughter's dancing with the father, and I was immediately 3 years old again, dancing with my dad when you describe that. So do you bring in like autobiographical, realistic elements into your fantastical writing?
Yeah, definitely. I find that because I love like the fairy tale feel and that sort of thing, but I find that when you kind of tether it down with truth, if you use truth as your skeletal structure to kind of hang these fairy tale things on, it just kind of reads more real. It hits harder in your heart. If it's too ephemeral, it just doesn't land like I want it to land. And I want it to be like beautiful, but also like, I like that visceral little, that teeth and that kind of like, oh, you're dancing with your daddy. That's so sweet. Now he's on fire, sort of. If you care more, if you make it more realistic, I think people identify with it more. And that way, when you kind of pull the rug out from under them, there's more to lose.
True. Very true. We're getting some comments here in the box. Do either of you have any other women in horror that you would like to give a shout out to? Writers, artists, photographers, anybody? People can put in the chat too. Who? You're both nodding. Mercedes, who would you like to shout out to? And then Suzi, I'll go to you
Karina
next.
Bissett.
Okay.
Absolutely gorgeous. Cynthia Paleo, also very, just kind of gets you right in the heart, fairy tale-esque. Gwendolyn Keist.
Okay. Suzi, what about you?
I would go with Paula Ashe. Her novel, the collection of short stories, We Are Here to Hurt Each Other, was just like, it was amazing. And of course, Jamie Jonassy.
Yes.
And Lee Mitchell. And of course, Mercedes.
Wonderful. And Suzi, do you have anything else you would like to plug? Anything else coming up that you would like to share with us that we should be on the lookout for?
Sure. I just released a simultaneous story called Things in the Woods, or Destination Unknown and Things in the Woods. So it's 2 stories happening simultaneously in a novella format. And it's like 2 halves of the same story. So they kind of meet in the middle. So where the one story ends, the other story is also happening. And
awesome.
So that one is already out and available. And I'm working on about 4 more that should be out this year.
Okay. Well, before we jump in, I would like to add Lisa Minetti and second Jamie Jonassy. I also adore Suzi and Mercedes writing. That was in the chat.
No, thank you.
Mercedes, what would you like to plug? Do you have anything that we should be, anything on the horizon that we should be looking at?
Yes. Coming in May, we're going to make a really awesome announcement about probably the biggest project I have ever taken part in. So that announcement's coming in May, and I am so excited. I'm sitting on it for a really long time. So keep your ears open. It's gonna be awesome.
Okay, we definitely will. And your godmother has an announcement. I have a book coming out at the end of March called The Solstice by Trepidatio Publishing, which is part of Journal Stone. So that they were on my bucket list. And now I can die a happy godmother.
Congratulations. Looking forward to it.
Thank you. So any other last questions or comments? We are rolling up onto the hour. Anything else anybody would like to say?
It's just a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for letting us come here and just kind of spend time with colleagues and women that write, and just kind of, it's so fun. It is so fun. It's its own little world. It's not like this in my home. This is a special place.
It's always inspiring. And Lee Mitchell has a 3rd book coming out too in the Divine Darkness trilogy. I read from book 2, and book 3 is coming out as well. So make sure you're checking those out. Again, I will put links in YouTube, links everywhere. People from the future who are watching this later, thank you for joining us. People who are here tonight, thank you so much for being here. We love you. Your godmother loves you and loves to see you. Please stay in touch, and we will be ending now.